Let us take up lines 3 and 4 of chapter 40 of the Tao Te Ching on the mystery of non-being. They read, "The things of the world originate in being, and being originates in non-being. The things of the world originate in being, and being originates in non-being." The term non-being might sound somewhat foreboding and untouchable. After all, how can anything that exists be non-being? Quite simply, to Lao Tzu, non-being is that which is nameless, imperceptible, indescribable. It is so absolutely transcendent that he cannot find words to describe it. So he calls it non-being. The word that comes to my mind as I contemplate the mystery of the ineffable is unbeing, meaning that the ineffable cannot be circumscribed. The 3rd century philosopher Wang Pi taught that non-being is the ultimate principle that underlies and unites all things, and that non-being is the equivalent of the Tao. Non-being is the equivalent of the Tao. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu describes the Tao as mysterious and unfathomable. Everything arises from it, and yet it is unnameable. Lao Tzu writes, "I do not yet know its name. I style it the way." As I said earlier, Tao is usually translated as the way. Were I forced to give it a name, says Lao Tzu, I would call it the Great. I would call it the Great. Toshihiko Izutsu says the namelessness of the way or the Tao is the same as its being, non-being. For whatever is absolutely imperceptible and inconceivable, whatever has no image at all, is for man the same as non-existent. It is nothing, but, he says, it is important to notice that the way appears as nothing only when looked at from our point of view. It is nothing for us because it transcends human cognition. Otherwise, the Tao in itself, far from being nothing, is existence in the fullest sense of the term, for it is the ultimate origin and source of all being. For ordinary human consciousness, the Tao is nothing. It does not exist within the realm of cognition or recognition. But it is not nothing in a purely negative sense. It is not a passive nothing. It is a positive nothing in the sense that it is non-being, pregnant with existence. Author John Noss suggests we think of non-being as unrealized potentiality. Seidel explains, in Lao Tzu's view, non-being is superior to being. It is the void that harbors in itself all potentialities, and without which even being lacks its efficacy. For me, it is simply the unperceived cause behind the perceived effect. As an interesting side note, Wing-Sit Chan explains how the Taoist concept of non-being has influenced Chinese culture. He says the Taoist interest in non-being has counteracted the positivistic tendency in certain Chinese philosophical schools, especially the legalist and Confucian, which often overlook what seems to be non-existent. It was because of the Taoist insistence on the positive value of non-being that empty space has been utilized as a constructive factor in Chinese landscape painting. In this greatest art of China, space is used to combine the various elements into an organic whole and to provide a setting in which the onlooker's imagination may work. By the same token, much is left unsaid in Chinese poetry, for the reader must play a creative role to bring the poetic idea into full realization. The Zen Buddhists have developed to the fullest the themes that real existence is found in the non-existent, and that true words are spoken in silence. But the origin of these themes must be traced to early Taoism. Some of the best examples of this are the poems and koans of Zen Buddhism. Take these 3 Zen haikus. A haiku is a 17-syllable Japanese poem. The butterfly having disappeared, my spirit came back to me. A lovely thing to see through the paper window's hole, the galaxy. Here is one of the most famous poems by the 17th century poet Basho, who is considered to be the greatest Japanese haiku poet. The old pond, a frog jumps in, plop. What's amazing about this is what Nancy Wilson Ross has to say. She says, these lines are said to represent the moment in which Basho's study of Zen came to its sudden fulfillment, when the mystery of the universe was solved in the plop of the falling frog. I can well identify with this. I think it is in astonishing moments when we observe nature or reality, and somehow we get into another dimension. We are suspended. Things come to a stop as though the universe had stopped, and all of a sudden, through a blade of grass, or a bee, or a bird, like a hummingbird, we suddenly perceive our relationship to the whole. A Zen koan is an anecdote, question, or statement containing a paradox. It is used in Zen Buddhism as a form of spiritual training, to open the student's intuitive mind or as a test of a student's level of attainment. Koans are not solvable by the reasoning mind or intellect. In order to solve a koan, the student must attain the same level of intuitive understanding as that from which the master spoke the words of the koan. Here is one Zen koan. If you meet a man of Tao on the way, greet him neither with words nor with silence. Now tell me, how will you greet him? Translator Ellen Chen says that non-being represents inexhaustible creativity and dynamism. She writes, if being refers to the concrete, particular physical existence of something, non-being is the universal dynamism contained within, behind, or above every particular being. Tao is this universal dynamism, present as the non-being in all beings. Non-being, the self-effacing, empty, or receptive, is the way of Tao. Being, that which exists, affirms itself, or has a specific essence, is the way of things, created things. Yet non-being lodges within the very heart of being. By this she means the Tao lodges within the very heart of everything it creates. Chen says, it is through the presence of non-being, the presence of the Tao, that beings fulfill their reason for being. While to be is to be served and provided for, to be useful, one must serve and provide. This is done when one makes room to accommodate others. Realization of this truth, that the usefulness of a being is measured by how much non-being is contained within it, tames the aggressive instincts in humans. In the process of serving its purpose, a thing dispenses and uses itself up. Being, in the process of its functioning, eventually exhausts itself, returns to non-being, and fulfills its destiny. This entire process we can observe in the chart of your divine self. Looking at the upper figure in the chart, you see the I am that I am, the presence of God that Brother Lawrence and other saints have known. You also see a diagram of the great Tao, such as it is. We see that this is the great Tao, and out of the great Tao comes forth the One. And the One is the child of the Tao, and the child is the only begotten son of that Father-Mother Tao. That son comes forth for the individualization of every living soul uniquely. So the son is depicted as the middle figure in the chart. To the plane of that Holy Christ self, that one son individualized for you and me as our true self, the soul descends as potential. The soul need never have descended lower than the plane of that only begotten Son, or that universal Christ consciousness. At that level, the soul can perfectly mirror the image and likeness of that living Christ, can be one with that Christ, can know the bliss of union with the bridegroom experienced by Beatrice of Nazareth, or Teresa of Avila, or many other saints. That union of the soul by the soul's perfect mirror reflection. But due to conditions and forces and an ancient history not known to us, our souls determined to descend to the next level that is depicted on the chart. It is the place of the lower self. It is the place of the incarnation of the soul in a physical body. We have discussed that physical bodies were not what they are today, thousands of years ago upon Earth. And in the great golden ages of Atlantis and Lemuria, the bodies that the souls wore were lighter, more transparent. Today we are living in a time of burden, planetary darkness, disease, and plagues. And so the bodies are heavy, less strong and less healthy than they were in ancient times. So the soul then has descended to this level. By setting into motion causes that have produced effects, the soul has become bound to this level of existence, to this type of body, to this type of planetary home. The reason we study the path of the Tao and returning to the Tao is that we desire to return to our source. We desire to discover what is this movement and how we move in the vibration of the Tao to re-enter its wholeness. And so, the self is active life after life. If at the plane of the Christ, then in golden ages and etheric octaves. If at the plane of the lower self, then in imperfection and on a path of sowing and reaping karma. What the soul does is to expend itself by extending itself. The soul that would return to God and that does follow the formula of the return correctly expends itself by extending itself to the glory of God, performing all of her works, all of the things that she does, to that glory and not to the glory of herself. This is to the glory of the great Tao. Then, according to the Taoist formula I just read to you, she returns to non-being in what we would call the ritual of the ascent. Immersed then in the great Tao, she yet retains identity with the Tao. Now, for such a one, through self-transcendence, the Tao is no longer non-being, because she now contains the All. Having so defined herself as the Tao, she can also measure the Tao. And that which she can measure is no longer that which is nameless, imperceptible, indescribable. She is now so absolutely transformed in the image and likeness of the Tao that she can find words to describe it. She no longer calls it non-being. She calls it being. This is the logical return to the Logos, the Word. The soul in her ascent back to the Tao comes to the plane of that Holy Christ self, attains union with that Christ self. Dressed then in the garment of light, she may enter the great, great Tao. This garment has been called the wedding garment. It is truly a garment of light that is spun by the soul using all of the energy that God has given her for this return. On the other hand, we take another soul, the soul who expends herself in the spending of all that portion of being which has been meted out to her. This is the violation of the Tao. For that portion is an endowment of the Tao for the grand experiment of free will here below. When the soul in the state of the lesser self chooses to use that allotment of life, energy, and consciousness to the glory of the lesser self, she returns to non-being without having entered the spirals of self-transcendence. This state of non-being is self-extinguishment by the exercise of free will in misusing the light of the great Tao. You see, the soul, shrouded in the lesser self that has misused the light of God, cannot return to non-being because she has not realized true being and the reason for being in the lesser self. She has not taken the opportunity of the descent and her allotment of God's light to exercise free will and to return to the divine whole. Until her purpose is fulfilled below, it cannot be filled above. Returning is the movement of the Tao, and there is neither returning nor movement when the allotted portion of the great Tao is entirely dissipated by the non-permanent lesser self. But to the self or soul that has glorified the Tao in all her members and returned to the Tao through the process of self-transcendence, the mystery of non-being is no longer a mystery. Remember, therefore, the law of the usefulness in the Tao. Your usefulness is measured by how much of the Tao you contain. And so I ask you the question, how much of the Tao have you retained, O soul, thou who hast descended from the great I Am? How much of your portion have you expended to the glory of the Tao, this light body of spheres within spheres, of ascending spirals of consciousness that you see above you, but cannot reach for all your grasping? How much of the Tao have you spent on your lesser self? How much of the Tao do you have left for the ritual of self-transcendence, whereby you may re-enter the great Tao and ultimately know non-being as being? Have you filled yourself with the non-being of the lesser self and left no sacred emptiness for the great Tao to inhabit? Have you not known the yin of your mother that is filled with the yang of your father? Are you full up with dead men's bones and the 10,000 unreal things you have coveted that are not the 10,000 things your Creator would have gladly given you? For you are of the Tao, and the Tao is you. Lao Tzu compares the dynamism and endless productivity of emptiness to a bellows. In chapter 5 of the Tao Te Ching, he uses this simile. Heaven and earth and all that lies between is like a bellows in that it is empty, but gives a supply that never fails. Work it, and more comes out. Lao Tzu also compares the emptiness of the Tao and the person who is one with the Tao to a valley. Itsuzu explains that the valley is by nature hollow and empty, and precisely because it is hollow and empty, it can be full. Add to this the fact that the valley always occupies a low place, another important trait of anything which is really high, whether human or non-human. The valley is thus an appropriate symbol for the Tao, understood as the absolute principle of eternal creativeness. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says, "Great virtue appears like a valley. The one who was skilled at practicing the way in antiquity was subtle and profound, mysterious and penetratingly wise. Broad and expansive was he, like a valley. He who knows humility becomes the valley of the world. Being the valley of the world, he will be proficient in eternal virtue." The 18th century Taoist adept and scholar Liu Yiming elaborates on what it means to be like a valley. When a person shouts in an empty valley, he says, there is a reverberation of sound. In folklore, this is called the valley spirit, because it has a voice but no form. It is called the spirit of the valley. What I realize as I observe this is the Tao, that is the way, of nurturing the spirit of emptiness. If people can be empty within, this is the valley. Within emptiness, there is a point of spiritual energy hidden inside. This is the spirit. This valley is tranquil and unperturbed. This spirit is sensitive and effective. Only the valley can be spiritual. Without the valley, there is no spirituality. The marvel of the spirit is only in the valley. People of the world are full of personal desires that block up the spiritual opening, polluting it in 100 ways. How can they have a valley? Since they do not have the valley, they are confused and troubled, like drunkards or dreamers. Their spiritual energy wanes away. So how can they have the spirit? Once they have lost the spirit, even though alive, they are as dead. If you can sweep away all entanglements and wash away accumulated obsessions, so as to be clean and naked, bare and free, with nothing at all, then in that empty valley, there will naturally be something indefinable, with essential vitality, a non-psychological spirit that is responsive, effective, and wise. Let go, it fills the universe. Wrapped up, it is stored in secrecy. Thereby one can be a peer of heaven above and earth below. Becoming an empty valley so you can be filled with what Liu Yiming calls spiritual energy is a theme sounded by mystics in many of the world's religions. Teresa of Avila wrote, God doesn't give himself completely until we give ourselves completely. He never works in the soul as he does when it is totally his without any obstacle. The idea of self-emptying oneself to allow room for God to enter in is a topic we took up when we discussed chapter 39 of the Tao Te Ching. There Lao Tzu taught, humble station is the basis of honor. The low is the foundation of the high. In their considering themselves mean, that is lowly, the princes and kings see the foundation of their dignity. I said in that lecture that Jesus also understood that only the lowly and humble who embrace the base, which is the one or the Tao, can reach to the heights. As an extension of this theme, Paul writes in his letter to the Philippians, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Jesus Christ, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men." Here the Jerusalem Bible says, he emptied himself to assume the condition of a slave, and became as men are. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Allowing himself to be crucified was Jesus' greatest weakness or softness, and his greatest emptiness. But it also became his greatest strength. Lao Tzu says, take emptiness to the limit. Maintain tranquility in the center. Each one returns to its root. This is called tranquility. Tranquility, this means to return to your fate. To return to your fate is to be constant. To know the constant is to be wise. Liu Yiming writes further on this theme. When a well sweep draws water, the bucket goes down empty and comes up full, drawing water in a continuous cycle to water the fields. What I realize as I observe this is the Tao of the twin functions of emptying and filling. If people can empty their hearts, that is, empty their hearts of everything less than the Tao, in order to make room for the Tao and be humble towards others, they will receive benefits that will fill them within and elevate them beyond others. The more they become empty and humble, the more they are fulfilled and elevated. Continually becoming empty, continually being fulfilled, continually becoming humble, continually being elevated, so that one is empty yet full, full yet empty, low yet high, high yet low. One attains to a state in which above and below are in communion. Emptiness and fulfillment correspond. Filled with the qualities of the Tao, those who reach this state never fail to ascend to lofty and clear perception. When it says in the Book of Changes, accord is in lowliness, it is good to attend to people's psychological needs in detail. It is a general reference to the fact that the more elevated the path, the humbler the mind. What I see through this teaching that is so profound, that all psychological problems are based on pride. The pride of the human ego, supplanting the divine ego, occupying the space, that is the emptiness that belongs only to the universal mind of the Tao, the mind that was in Christ Jesus, Gautama Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, and all the saints and brothers and sisters we know. This knowledge that pride is the key to overcoming or transmuting the unreal self, the not self, the shadowed self, or what we call the synthetic image, which supplants the true self of non-being, is truly the opening of the mind. this very knowledge that pride is the key. Pride eludes itself from us. If we are proud, we know not that we are proud. If we take pride in virtue or in vice, we know not. Others may behold us and see and know that we have pride, yet they cannot identify their own pride. Pride is the face of the ego. Pride and ego going together destroy the soul potential, the non-being or unbeing of the great Tao, our potential to be. It is a self that is not real that gets in the way of the real self. And so often, we simply don't see it. What I understand from Liu Yiming's analogy of the continual emptying and the filling of the bucket with water is, if you are empty, God can fill you with the water of his love so that you can give it away to others in need. And when you have given away that love in service to others and you are literally spent, God will refill your bucket. I want to talk to you now about the Sufi poet, Rumi. He speaks of the self-emptying process as the abandonment of self, that is the lesser self. He writes, before it is annihilated, no single soul finds admittance to the divine hall of audience. What is ascension to heaven, he asks. It is this, annihilation of self. I believe he is talking about the annihilation of the pride of the self and the ego of the self. Self-abandonment, he says, is the creed and religion of lovers. For me, God is my divine lover, who pursues my soul with abandonment, as my soul pursues him with total abandonment. Thus, having totally abandoned self, I am clothed with himself, and I am become him, and he has become me. Oh, what a great lightness it is to be unburdened from the sense of self. We speak of the soul as the fallen potential that must rise to the place of her origin, to be fully redeemed in God, the great Tao. We speak of the annihilation of the synthetic self, the self-created ego, that is the antithesis of the God self-created ego. But we also speak of the annihilation of the soul in the second death, as noted by John in Revelation 20:14 and 21:8. The second death occurs when the seed potential or soul has by free will elected not to subordinate itself to that divine monad, that I am, the great Tao. This subordination of the lesser self to the greater self is the criterion for returning to the Tao. It is the standard for your ascension, for your bonding to that Holy Christ self. It is the standard by which you do walk and talk with God and practice his presence perpetually. At a certain point in the process of emptying yourself, you will find that God becomes so much a part of you that he is the one who is thinking, feeling, talking, loving, caring, comforting in and through you. Jesus affirmed this when he said, "My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. The Son can do nothing of himself, but what he seeth the Father do. I can of mine own self do nothing. I seek not my own will, but the will of the Father which hath sent me. The words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself, but the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works." The 19th century Hindu saint Ramakrishna taught this prayer. I am the machine, thou art the operator. I am the house, thou art the householder. I speak as thou makest me speak. I act as thou makest me act. Eva de Vitre Mairovich writes of this theme as it is taken up in Islam. She says, God, as we are told by the Quran, is nearer to man than his jugular vein. The mystic discovers him in his heart if he loves. God declares through the prophet's voice, my earth and my heavens do not contain me, but I am contained in the heart of my faithful servant. And again God said, there is no other means for my servant to approach me than to accomplish the duties I have prescribed for him. And my servant continues to approach me by more unprescribed works until I love him. When I love him, I become the ear with which he hears, the eye with which he sees, the tongue with which he talks, and the hand with which he seizes. Catherine of Siena testified that in the process of self-emptying, God's heart can become your heart. This is a most amazing witness. Once when she was praying with great fervor, saying with the prophet, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me, and particularly begging God to take from her her own heart and her own will, he himself consoled her with this vision. It seemed to her that the eternal bridegroom was coming to her in his usual manner, opening her left side, taking out her heart, and departing from her. And she was left without any heart at all. This vision was so persistent and so detrimental to the feeling of the flesh that she told her confessor in confession that she no longer had a heart in her breast. And when he made a jest concerning that word and jesting rebuked her in a certain way, she repeated what she had said and confirmed it, saying, in truth, Father, as far as I can judge my bodily feeling, I think that I am indeed without a heart. For the Lord appeared to me, opened my left side, took out my heart, and departed. And when he replied that it was impossible to live without a heart, the Virgin of the Lord declared that with God nothing is impossible, and she believed with certainty that she was robbed of her heart. And thus for many days she repeated the same, saying that she lived without a heart. One day she remained in prayer after the departure of the others in the chapel of the Brothers of the Preaching Order in Siena, where the sisters used to gather. When she arose upon waking from the sleep of her usual detachment, a light of heaven suddenly shone round about her, and in the light the Lord appeared to her, bearing in his consecrated hands a reddish and shining human heart. And when at the arrival of him who was the cause of the light, she sank trembling to the ground, the Lord approached her, opened her left side once more, placed inside her that heart which he bore in his hands, and said, see, beloved daughter, just as I took your heart from you the other day, so I am now giving you my heart, with which you will live from now on. Catherine had merited having the heart of Jesus because she was able to retain it. When you have so much love in your heart that you are able to retain Jesus' heart, he will give you that sacred heart permanently. As Lao Tzu says, can you keep the Spirit and embrace the One without departing from them? Can you concentrate your vital force and achieve the highest degree of weakness like an infant? Can you wipe and cleanse your vision of the mystery till all is without blur. I have to think in my heart that the ancient Taoists became Christian mystics, and that the Christian mystics became Taoists. They are so intertwined in the understanding of the same mystery. Take, for instance, the 10th century Byzantine monk and mystic, Saint Simeon, the New Theologian. He expressed his oneness with Christ in his love songs to God. Love songs to God. I'm going to read to you his lines and insert the parallels that I find between the contemplations of the Taoist mystic and Simeon's own. For me, to do this is a sublime experience. Saint Simeon says, I am loved by him who is not in this world, and amid this cell see him who is outside the world. I sit upon my bed and abide outside the world, yet I see him who is eternal and yet born, and speak with him, and dare to say, I love, for he loves me. I feed on contemplation. I clothe myself in it. United with him, I transcend the heavens. And that all this is true and certain, I know. But where this body is then, of that I have no cognizance. I know that he who is unmoved descends. I know that he who is by nature such that no eye may gaze upon him is gazed upon by me. I know that he who is far removed from every creature takes me up in himself and hides me in his arms, and I find myself outside the whole world. He whom no eye may gaze upon, and he who is far removed from every creature, is like the Tao, formless, intangible, yet all-pervading. Lao Tzu said in the Tao Te Ching, the great image has no shape. The Tao is great, but has no name. Tao is hidden and nameless, yet it is Tao alone that skillfully provides for all and brings them to perfection. Saint Simeon says, and then again, I who am mortal and an insignificant person in the world, behold the entire creator of the world in myself. And even while I live, I embrace all blossoming life in myself, and know that I shall not die. Lao Tzu writes in chapter 16 of the Tao Te Ching, he who attains Tao is everlasting. Though his body may decay, he never perishes. Saint Simeon writes, in my heart he is, and dwells in heaven. Here and there I see him in the same radiance. We are limbs of Christ. Christ is our limb, and my hand, the hand of the poorest creature, is Christ. And my foot is Christ, and I, the poorest creature, am the hand and foot of Christ. I move my hand, and so does Christ. For he, in entirety, is my hand. Here we remember the words of Liu Yiming. The more people become empty and humble, the more they are fulfilled and elevated. Continually becoming empty, continually being fulfilled, continually becoming humble, continually being elevated, so that one is empty yet full, full yet empty, low yet high, high yet low. One attains to a state in which above and below are in communion. Emptiness and fulfillment correspond. Filled with the qualities of the Tao, those who reach this state never fail to ascend to lofty and clear perception. Saint Simeon says, "You must understand that the Godhead is undivided. I move my foot, it shines as he does. Say not that I blaspheme, but confirm this and adore Christ, who has made you so. For you too, if you will, can become his limb. And so all the limbs of each of us will become limbs of Christ, and Christ will become our limb. And he will make all that is ugly and ill-formed beautiful and well-formed, adorning it with the splendor and dignity of his divinity. And we shall all together become gods, intimately united with God, aware of no blemish on our bodies, but sharing fully in the resemblance to the entire body of Christ. So each of us shall have all of Christ, for the one, when he has become many, remains one, undivided. But every part is the whole Christ. He himself is present and shines in my poor heart, clothes me in immortal splendor, and shines through all my limbs, embraces me wholly, kisses me wholly, and gives himself entirely to me, unworthy as I am. As Lao Tzu said, he who knows humility becomes the valley of the world. His emptiness allows him to become filled with the Tao. Liu Yiming said, if you can sweep away all entanglements and wash away accumulated obsessions, so as to be clean and naked, bare and free with nothing at all, then in that empty valley there will naturally be something indefinable with essential vitality. Saint Simeon writes, and I take my fill of his love and beauty, and am filled with the rapture and sweetness of the Godhead. I receive a share in the light, a share in the glory, and my countenance shines like that of him who is my desire, and all my limbs become bright. I become more splendid than the splendid, richer than the rich, mightier than all the wielders of might. And I am greater than kings and far more honored than all visible things, not only the earth and what is on earth, but even heaven and what is in the heavens. Since I have with me the shaper of all things, to whom belongs the praise and the honor, now and eternally. Amen. When he had filled me with heavenly joy, he flew away and took my spirit, my mind, and my desire for all earthly things with him. And following him, my spirit demanded to embrace the splendor I had beheld, but did not find him as creature, and did not succeed in going out from among the creatures, that it might embrace the uncreated and uncomprehended splendor. The uncreated and uncomprehended splendor. The uncreated and uncomprehended splendor is the great nameless, undefinable, yet unceasing Tao. Lao Tzu says, we look at it and do not see it. Its name is the invisible. We listen to it and do not hear it. Its name is the inaudible. We touch it and do not find it. Its name is the subtle or formless. Saint Simeon says, and I lamented and sorrowed and burned in my core and lived like one removed in spirit. But he came at his own will, and descending like a bright cloud of mist, seemed to surround my head entirely, so that I cried out in consternation. But he, flying off again, left me alone, and when I laboriously sought him, I suddenly came to know that he was in myself. And in the center of my heart, he appeared like the light of a sun, round as a circle. When he had revealed himself thus, and I had recognized and received him, he put the whirlwind of demons to flight, repulsed my cowardly dread, put strength into me, stripped my soul of earthly thoughts, and reclothed me with the thoughts of the Spirit. From the things that are seen, he severed me, and with those that are not seen, he connected me. He permitted me to see the uncreated and to rejoice that I have been sundered from the created, from the visible, from that which swiftly passes away, and am united with the uncreated, the immortal, which has no beginning and cannot be seen by anyone. Such is mercy. Thank you very much, everyone. This concludes our message for today. Thank you very much for your very kind attention. I'm so grateful for your presence because I know no greater joy in life than to be able to deliver these teachings. And who knows when a very special thread of that teaching or a strain of God's music that you hear in your heart will be the very thing that will unlock the floodgates of your own I Am presence and give to you that full sense of absolute divine union with God and your liberation from all sorrow and suffering in the sense that you are a self apart from God. When you think about it, that never, ever could be the truth, because God has never left you alone, and his presence is with you and in you, and all the saints testify to it. I am sure that you have had, as I have had in this experience of these teachings, a new and profound understanding of our path and of the meaning of Jesus' teachings in the setting of Taoism. This is such a great jeweled gift to us, to see that teaching exactly in the setting of the great, great masters of the Far East, going back to the Yellow Emperor, back to the ancient Himalayas, back to the golden ages of Atlantis, and far, far back to the golden ages of Lemuria, to find that thread of contact and to see how great is the oneness of the great deliverers of the world's religions. This is such a joy to my heart. God spoke in these terms for different evolutions and life waves, people who thought in different ways and felt in different ways, for whom there was another language and another understanding. And this is the hour and the century of the Holy Spirit, when the Holy Spirit interprets to us all of these languages, and there can no longer be separate religion unto the light bearers of the new age, because God is one, and we are one. And as Saint Simeon taught us, when we are one with Christ, we are all of Christ, not just a part of him. And all of us being in that one Christ, we are all one in the universal Christ, with all others who have so affirmed and experienced this same great mystery. As Saint Simeon said, this is mercy. Have a nice day, everyone. Thank you.